think that's a beautiful image, but this is too gothic actually. What I was wanting something more lighter for the book, but it was the best I could that the designer showed me. Anyway, effects, theories, and models. Last lesson in this introduction to psychology. So we want them to know what these things are. Quite abstract, but if they get the general idea. Now, why I start the unit with this is because I find that tangible things like hormones, neurotransmitters, cultural dimensions, these things that are very, very specific are easy for students to grasp. Explanations are easy for students to grasp. Social identity theory and the working memory model are really tricky. So I think just if we can have an introduction to what these things are, it might help. All right, mini whiteboards, see what they can remember, or even just put it in the back of their workbooks. That's for them to check their answers. A short quizzes, and in this quizzes I've got some questions on the 6 concepts, or maybe not all 6, but a few of the concepts. You'll notice that I haven't really mentioned them at all, that I've put them in the critical thinking extension, and that's by design. I would rather teach psychology than the abstract concepts that can link with literally everything in the course. So we'll have plenty of time to get them to later. I don't want the students to see them everywhere. I feel like they will fog and cloud everything because they are relevant to everything. So if they're relevant to everything, then we can see that later when it comes time to review for the exams. Right now I want to focus on the content. Probably need to explain this a little bit. I like to talk about Sigmund Freud in the beginning of the course and say, look, we kind of need evidence. This guy came up with some fascinating theories, propelled to stardom, hugely famous in psychology, but his every boy's in love with his mother idea, and I'm not that well versed in Freud. The Oedipus complex and things, I should know more than I do, but the idea that he came up with these theories, but they were theories and he didn't really have a wealth of evidence to support them. However, having said that, later in the course we'll look at how psychoanalysis, which is still really popular, actually comes out in clinical trials as being just as effective as cognitive behavioural therapy, which is really interesting. But anyway, I use this as a, hey look, we need science in psychology, we need some data, we need some evidence to support our theories. We don't want to come up with crackpot theories. Sorry, Freud. And sorry if you're a fan of Freud. I just use it as deliberately inflammatory language to spark a bit. Now, this video you might not want to watch. This is, they do the brain surgery. It's not really trepanation, it's they cut open the brain, and we never watch the whole thing, just a couple of minutes is enough, but it's fascinating, and it just introduces that idea of I'm seeing increasingly psychology, the word scientific is being removed from the definition, and it's the idea being we're considering other ways of knowing, right? Traditional ways, indigenous ways of knowing that haven't really followed the scientific method. It's more knowledge being passed on from generation to generation. Later in the course in depression, we look at traditional Chinese medicine, right? Hasn't been through the scientific method, strictly speaking. And I just want the first few lessons to be interesting and memorable and engaging and enticing for students, and this gets a reaction every time. But you may choose not to watch it, but I like it. I've kept this from the introduction unit because it's a very simple, very straightforward, but I think good activity to demonstrate what a theory is. There's a short clip which goes through all a history of war over 1,000 years, and the explosions mirror the size of the conflict, and the students are trying to notice patterns. 2 patterns that they should have noticed were that it's mostly in Europe, and they became more frequent, and they actually became larger. And then they try to explain those patterns, right? So not only what patterns do you notice, again, thinking like psychologists, make observations and then ask why, come up with some hypotheses. Can they explain them? Hopefully they might come up with things like the population in Europe was more dense, the technological advancements, things like this. And what they're doing is they are proposing a theory, right? They are coming up with an attempt to explain why something exists. Now, we could distinguish theory from hypothesis here. Hypothesis is a prediction of what we think will happen or is true of the world, and a theory is the same but supported by evidence. And we can use social learning theory, right? Broad theory trying to explain a lot of behaviors, but best linked to aggression. So look, Bandura said, Freud has some truth to it, and yes, behaviorists have some truth to them, but social learning theory we learn through observation. Model, explain, what is a model, and sometimes I like to use the example of a clay model, or what are they, the model airplanes, right? It's a visual demonstration, representation of something, and this is what a psychological model is. It's a demonstration of how a process happens, right? We can look at the multi-store model. Look, even the IB guide uses the word model and theory interchangeably, right? They say dual process theory at one point and dual process model at another point, and so we can use them interchangeably as well. So I wouldn't get hung up on the distinction between a theory and a model. They are attempts to explain something psychological. That's really what we're trying to get out of it. Psychological effects, probably again quite tricky to explain for a novice. They're a consistent and commonly observed pattern of behavior, right? Mozart effect, Hawthorne effect, anchor effect, 3 good examples. And then we're going to get into the Stroop effect. Now I've linked here, there's, I think it's genetics at Utah University have made all the materials already, so I didn't have to remake them. And this is just a fun way a fun activity to do in the class to run the Stroop effect. We don't really study the Stroop effect at any other time in the course, so why not do this simple experiment now? And it's a bit of a classic in psychology, so we really should put it somewhere in the course, right? And then here we can look at the idea. We get the data, and does that support or challenge this Stroop effect? And again, introducing that idea of we need the data, we need the studies to support and challenge the theories. A student of mine asked this earlier this year, and we're doing research, and it was just such a beautifully simple question, but it was so important, and I would love for students to be asking this more. How do we know what's true in psychology? And this is the problem with using ChatGPT and AI is, well, how do we know what's true? This video, you may only want to watch 10 minutes of this. It's 15 minutes long, which I used to find was a good time frame. Now I find 15 minutes is at the upper end of students' attention spans. But I think it does a really good job of talking about a range of, I've called them theories, but they're not all theories he talks about. But it introduces a range of psychological concepts, which is what we're doing in the introduction unit. And students are listening to try to hear, why did these theories become myths? And the idea is because they were debunked by studies, right? The studies found that the data didn't support them, so they're not theories now, they become myths. Learning styles is in there. Fascinating. I had a student teacher this year, and they are still learning about learning styles and encouraged to use learning styles in their teaching. Oh my gosh, the state of education. Sorry. Now, that is the unit finished. Here's the crossword puzzle. By now, hopefully they can finish off the crossword puzzle. The workbook has a short quiz. You could use that as just a formative assessment. If you need a more formal summative assessment, you could use that as well. You could take it out of the workbook and keep it if you wanted some data, but I would imagine after 5 lessons, no school in their right mind is expecting you to have formal summative data. So that's it. My other unit. We can finish with the key terms, traffic lights, take notes in the workbook, ask questions. In my first edition, I had a 7 to 8 lesson introduction, and standard level just don't have the time now for that in this new course, unfortunately. Higher level have plenty of time, but I wanted to cut it down to 5 lessons. I haven't gone heavy into research methods, and that's deliberate. My course, you can obviously do it how you like, but I found that it was easier to teach that later in the course when they had more content knowledge, because then I can use that content to demonstrate the different approaches to research. Okay, I really hope that your students like these activities, or you find this helpful if you follow it word to word, or if you just cherry pick your favorite activities or anything in between. I hope it was helpful. Thank you.